In this episode, we look at left-wing authoritarianism, starting with its philosophical roots in postmodernism and Marxism, and then progressing to its modern-day manifestations as critical race theory and identity politics. We define and analyze cancel culture, microaggressions, trigger warnings, and safe spaces. And in conclusion, we examine recent research on the personality of left-wing authoritarians. Pluckrose and Lindsay in 2020 associate the rise of the far left with postmodernism. This is a philosophical view which rejects quote-unquote Western values like science, reason, and objective truth. Postmodernists reduce truth to what is defined by one's group or tribe, and state that knowledge is therefore subjective and relative. This precludes the use of argumentation or debate in order to determine which viewpoints might be right. The far left often adopts a Marxist perspective in which one ruling class is seen to dominate and control another, eventually resulting in the overthrow and replacement of that dominant class. Although historically this was seen from a purely economic perspective with the bourgeoisie factory owners and the working class proletariat, it has since been replaced with race and sexual classes, what is now referred to as cultural Marxism. The far left are also linked with the promotion of social justice, identity politics, and political correctness. Pluckrose and Lindsay note that people can be fired or canceled by these individuals for having done or said something interpreted as being sexist, racist, or homophobic. These accusations, in their view, are frequently subjective and can have a chilling effect on free expression. Members of the far left are well entrenched in academia and espouse racism as more than just individual prejudice. They see it as an institutionalized system that permeates much of society. They see society in terms of power dynamics, where certain groups, like whites or Europeans, dominate others, like blacks or indigenous peoples. They tend to divide societies up into groups that are labeled as oppressors and the oppressed. These ideas are generally known as critical race theory or identity politics. In addition to racial minorities, the far left also view groups they say are sexually marginalized, like members of LGBTQ, in this same manner. They promote the idea of pronouns to more correctly label one's sexuality and race, adopting terms like Latinx instead of Latino. One aspect of the far left is the concept of intersectionality, which means that various types of oppression, such as racism, sexism, homophobia, or transphobia, can add on top of one another. A black woman in this scheme suffers from double oppression stemming from race and sex, while a white woman only suffers from one. Those who become aware of these forms of oppression are said to be woke. People in this scheme can intentionally or unintentionally cause harm to others by verbal or behavioral indignities that communicate derogatory insults. These are known as quote-unquote microaggressions. However, one 2017 study found that people of color were, in most cases, not found to be offended from terms taken from a possible list of microaggressive statements. Another hallmark of the far left in academia is the presence of trigger warnings. These are statements from a teacher that a student might encounter uncomfortable material, that which might trigger some type of previously experienced trauma, such as rape or bullying. The student could then be excused from having to attend or read about this topic. A problem with such warnings is that, although well-intentioned, they include so many terms that they could exclude nearly everyone, according to Suave in 2019. Opponents of this approach have said that this assumes students are more sensitive than they really are, and that without being exposed to the material, they cannot learn from it. Left-wing authoritarians, on the other hand, believe it is their duty to protect students from experiencing any type of insult. This is the reasoning behind the provision of safe spaces, areas on campus that have been deemed to be free of possible harm. Identity politics has helped to educate people about the history of oppression in all of its forms, whether those be political, economic, colonial, racist, or sexist. In this sense, it has helped us become more aware of our own insensitivities and biases, much of which may remain implicit. However, it may be doing more harm than good. In this section, we provide a number of critiques of this perspective. Horowitz, in 2021, points out that depicting all of human behavior as political requires totalitarian control. It erases individualism and replaces it with assigned categories that gloss over our uniqueness. According to him, it creates a world in which we are judged by assigned categories and not by our individual personalities. To say that someone is guilty of racism simply because they are white, in his view, denies human agency and implies that we are victims of built-in social hierarchies. He also notes that classical liberalism, the basis upon which the U.S. was founded, guarantees individual rights and equality before the law. Although having a checkered history, the U.S., under white majority rule, did eventually abolish slavery and go on to elect a black president. It has also made great strides towards advancing women's and minority rights before cultural Marxism appeared on the scene. Murray, in 2019, states that the focus of class affiliation over individualism is, of course, polarizing. It pits whites against blacks, rich against poor, and heterosexuality over other forms of sexual orientation. Left-wing authoritarian linguistic and behavioral controls suppress freedom of speech and debate. The ideology has in many cases resulted in the firing of professors and may be encouraging hypersensitivity and inappropriate calling out of authority figures by Generation Z students. Are left-wing authoritarians different from right-wing authoritarians? Costello and his colleagues in 2021 studied personality differences between these two groups. They found that left-wing authoritarians scored higher on the desire to forcefully overthrow the established hierarchy and punish those in power. This group also correlated more highly with the desire for top-down censorship, such as imposing limitations on speech. Left-wing authoritarianism was additionally related to moral absolutism with regards to progressive values, the coercion or coercive imposition of left-wing beliefs on others, and social and ideological homogeneity in one's environment. Some more of the differences that were discovered in this study were larger negative affect or emotionality for left-wing authoritarians, who also show less confirmatory style thinking, less cognitive rigidity, and more openness. In addition, left-wing authoritarians show greater belief in science, less conformity, more willingness to ban opposing views, greater partisan violence in the form of protests, for example, and moral disengagement. Importantly, this study showed that both sides share many similarities in common, especially the desire for social domination. So a person may have an authoritarian disposition that could, depending on circumstances like upbringing or family political orientation, skew them either to the left politically or the right politically.